Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. You should have an outline with part 5 on it. Outline with part 5. The privileged planet, or this privileged planet. Let me clarify something about tonight's festival or fellowship. It's for everybody. It's not just for children and families with children. It's for everybody. This is a church-wide fellowship. Even if you don't do the inflatables and get in them and bounce up and down, you can eat the refreshments, kettle corn, everything else. So everybody is invited. So don't think that this is kind of just a young folks deal. All right? So I wanted to emphasize that. Second thing I want to emphasize is that the 6th of November, Sunday evening, 6 o'clock. That was clarified in the announcements in the first service. I couldn't remember if it was 6:30 or 6. At 6 o'clock, I will be doing the Black Robe presentation here, full-blown museum, the whole deal. So you want to come and be a part of that. Obviously, if you've never seen it, we'd love for you to see it. Even if you've caught it by video on YouTube or whatever, that never does it justice. So come and see it live. Encourage family and friends. That's the reason we're doing this, because so many of you are new to our church, so you've probably never seen it. And many of you have family and friends who have never seen it. Sunday night is a great time. That way, if they have another church, they can go to their church service on Sunday, and then even if they have Sunday night services, they can skip out and come over here for that. So 6 o'clock, that is the same day that our clocks change. So it's going to be getting dark at 6 o'clock 2 weeks from today. So that'll be good for as far as the dramatic setting, although now we have window coverings that help us a lot. But still, the Black Robe, I'll have books and DVDs and everything here in case you want to pick up something for a family member or a friend, or they want to get something. So don't hesitate. We still have some outlines. If you need an outline, lift your hand. Should say part 5 on it, This Privileged Planet. Don't forget again tonight at 5:30. It's for all ages, so you come no matter what. Even if you're just coming by yourself, that's okay too. Just come on, all right? Okay, well, everything went very well in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. If you've never been there, that is the beginning of the really pretty part of Idaho. And now some folks like the southern desert, the mountainous desert. I personally don't. But when you get up to Coeur d'Alene, it really starts getting beautiful. And the way that I go takes you up through Montana and then Wyoming, so you get to see a lot of beautiful territory as well. But the camp went really, really well. And, you know, it's difficult to convey something to someone who's not experienced it, right? I mean, it's kind of hard to explain the color blue to someone who's born blind. Well, with these camps, if you've never attended one, it's hard to try to explain what actually happens there. Yes, I do the Black Robe. Yes, Paul speaks. I speak. We teach on different sessions, and we have other speakers come in. But there's kind of it's very eye-opening for these pastors and their wives and other leaders who are there, and you can see the light bulb coming on for them, and then they'll come up to us and tell us so. And it's liberating for them. It's challenging. For some of them, it's illuminating. They've not thought along these lines before. And then they go away to their churches and begin to transform their ministries, not to just be about politics, but to transform their ministries to be about the whole counsel of God. And they're no longer censoring the message, or they don't feel like the IRS is going to come get them if they say anything. Now, that may happen someday. We may be headed that way. We'll just have to see. But legally speaking, constitutionally speaking, they don't have to worry about that. And they've been censoring themselves and not saying what was on their hearts. And so it's great to see them walk away, and then we see the results and hear the results. So thank you for your prayers. Thank you for helping make that possible, and for being patient with us when we are away, because we just don't know any other way to do it except to be there. All right, well, let's talk about part 5 in this series that we're calling Truth Matters. We took the time in the initial lessons to establish certain truth principles. Now what we're doing is we're looking at obvious proofs of truth. And in particular, the existence of God, and then, of course, if God exists, who would he be like? Would he be like Allah? Would he be like the God of the Buddhists who really almost have no God, really? Everything just merges together. Would it be like the Japanese Shintoism, which really they don't have a God either, it's their ancestors? No, if there is a God, he would most likely look like the God depicted in the Old and the New Testaments. And so then, if that's the God, then obviously we're accountable to him as he says we are in the Old and the New Testament. So all of this is very important. Most of us never consider, we just get up and we go about our business. We came here today, and we may not consider the tremendous privileges that we experience because of the uniqueness of planet Earth. Out of all of the planets that we know anything about in our own solar system, and we would assume it's the same throughout, this is the one little planet that has all of these incredible privileges. Wonder why that is. Wonder why out of all the planets in this solar system, this is the one. Why is that? Well, it's obvious that God had a purpose. In fact, the precision with which the universe exploded into being provides even more persuasive evidence for the existence of God. Now, when I say exploded, I don't mean exploded like the Big Bang. Not some mindless, causeless explosion. We're talking about the explosion that you read in Genesis 1:1, where God speaks everything into being out of nothing. That's the explosion that we're talking about. So all of this is proof. Now, we can look at all kinds of scriptures. For instance, Isaiah 40, verses 25 and 26. To whom then will you liken me, God says, or to whom shall I be equal? Says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes on high. See who has created these things, who brings out their host by number. He calls them all by name. By the greatness of his might and the strength of his power, not one is missing. And he's talking about the starry heavens, knows the name of every star. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood, or we clearly see, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So when you look at creation, it's obvious. So when we look at our own solar system and those 9 planets that revolve around the sun, which is a medium-sized star, Isaac Newton put it like this: this most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being, capital B. So that's the whole purpose of this lesson, is to get us to recognize that this planet Earth, which is a smaller of all of the planets, is unique for a reason. God made it so. It was God who put all of these into existence and into orbit around the sun. So when you look at our solar system and you look at the moons, which there are many, our moon is the one that we're, of course, most familiar with. We look at this incredible design. We look at other planets like Mars, which we are presently trying to explore. And I just sometimes laugh at the extent to which NASA and other scientists are going to and willing to go to try desperately to find life somewhere else. Why are they driven to that? Well, I think they're driven to that for one reason only. They're trying to show that life is not all that unique, that life is everywhere. Thus, it's just random chance, and there is no God who uniquely designed this planet for life, but that life is either in existence or at one time existed on these other planets. And yet you look at the incredible beauty and precision with which all of these planets function in this solar system. And just to kind of keep us in perspective, there's the Earth in relationship to Jupiter. So just notice that, as I said a few weeks ago, the hurricane is what we would call it. That eye on Jupiter is actually larger than our planet. So that kind of puts us in perspective, doesn't it? I don't know if you've ever looked through a reflector telescope, but if you have, you can see the rings of Saturn. I took one class in astronomy when I was in college, and we were able to check out 8-inch reflector telescopes. And it was amazing what you can see. And I could, for the first time in my life, I saw the rings of Saturn. Look at the beauty that God has created. Or the planet Neptune. All of this operating in precision in relation to this one little privileged planet. Because there's no life on these other planets. Now, I don't know what kind of life there may have been. Who knows what God had before Satan messed everything up and judgment fell. But I can tell you this, there's no life on these planets. James Tour, who is a renowned nanoscientist, put it like this: only a rookie who knows nothing about science would say science takes away from faith. If you really study science, it will bring you closer to God. Now, there's a man who has spent his life accumulating degrees to only find what many of us know and always knew he didn't have any of those degrees. That the more you study creation, the more it screams that there's a God. Well, that's what Paul said in Romans 1. It's what he said, and so it's good to know it. Even John Glenn, the famous astronaut who passed away not that long ago, said to look out at this kind of creation and not believe in God is to me impossible. And here's one of the first guys to ever actually be able to view the earth from outer space. And he said, I'm telling you, you look at this and you have to believe in a God. One of the books that I've recommended that you get your hands on and keep it in your library, not to gather dust, but to use, is the book written by Norm Geisler and Frank Turek entitled, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. That book is just filled with proofs and incredible truths that will help you, because they've helped me. And in that book, one of the things they say is believing without observation is exactly what atheists accuse religious people, of course we all know they're talking about Christians, of doing. But ironically, it's the atheists who are pushing a religion of blind faith. Paul has actually written a booklet that he's given out all over the country, Not Blind Faith. It's actually the atheists who are guilty of the blind faith. He goes on to say, Christians have good reasons based on observation for believing what they believe. Atheists don't. That's why we don't have enough faith to be atheists. And this world is always constantly trying to make us feel stupid or ignorant or uneducated because we have faith. And if we're not careful, that will eventually begin to permeate us. You know, you get hit hard enough, and eventually you begin to kind of succumb to the blows. And this world just keeps telling us, you dumb Christians, you stupid people, don't you know that your faith is elementary and almost asinine? You dummies, you don't know anything. We're the ones who know everything. Well, the truth is, they're the ones who don't accept the obvious truth staring them in the face. It is we who are wise enough to recognize what we know creation is screaming to us. And then, of course, as I've quoted over and over, and we just have, those who went ahead to explore and study in all of the different fields of science, if they're honest with you, will tell you the more you learn about this universe, the more you learn about this planet, the more it screams of God. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about what is called the teleological argument. The teleological argument points to a designer who designed the universe, thus, of course, planet Earth. Now, teleological comes from the Greek word telos or telos, which means design. So when we're talking about the teleological argument, what we're talking about is the argument of intelligent design. How when we see something that is intricate and complex, we know that it didn't just happen. There had to be a designer. One of the early preachers and scientists by the name of William Paley actually was one of the fathers of this whole concept, and he was the one that came up with the watchmaker illustration. Now, everybody understood that before him, but he was the one to kind of point it out. And he used the very simplistic argument of the watch that you may wear on your wrist. In his day, it would have been in your pocket or on the wall or sitting on the fireplace mantle. But the idea that a watch, by definition, had to have a maker, that there's no way that a watch just happens. Even if the parts just happened, and we know that the parts cannot just happen. Have you ever pulled a watch apart and looked at how small those parts are and how intricate they are? But even if the parts just happened and you had all the parts necessary and you could put them into a container, how long would you have to shake the container until all of those parts fell into the proper alignment until you had a fully assembled and working wristwatch or pocket watch or fireplace mantle clock or grandfather clock or grandmother clock? I mean, obviously, you could shake that box until eternity is over, which is an impossibility, and those parts are never going to align themselves in the proper order so that you would have a working clock. Well, William Paley was one of the first ones to point out that obvious fact. So don't feel like you're some kind of uneducated dummy because you believe the Bible. In fact, the Bible says you're the wisest among those who've ever existed if you believe what God says and what creation confirms to you. So the teleological argument goes like this. Every design had a designer. The universe has a highly complex design, therefore, the universe had a designer. But the designer of the universe would not be lowercase d, it would be uppercase D, because that'd have to be God. I mean, who could possibly design the universe but a God? And since we know that there's only one God, the Creator, talked about in Genesis 1:1 all the way through to Revelation 22:21, we know that that designer has to be God. Now, by the way, this is a scientific principle. This is not just a theological principle. This is a scientific principle. So when you walk outside and you look at all those automobiles in the parking lot, you don't consciously know this, but unconsciously you know that somebody designed those. Not only does somebody design those, someone worked really hard to make those cars. There are even people paid to keep them working, right? We call those mechanics. And you know that those automobiles didn't just happen. You know that. You don't necessarily consciously walk out there and say, oh, look at all these wonderful designs out here. And man, I'd love to meet the guy that designed that. And boy, I'd love to be. You don't consciously think that, but you subconsciously know it. Now, if that is true, and it is, then how much more your human eye, which is far more complex than any of the vehicles we drove here today. You think that just happened, and yet that Cadillac didn't? It's ridiculous. Well, that's what the teleological argument says, that when something is complex and has obvious design, that's because it had a designer. Now, that's not the only principle. There's another principle that gives ample evidence of the design of the universe, and it's called the anthropic principle. So this is principle number 2. What is the anthropic principle? Well, the word anthropic comes from a Greek base word that means human or man. So the anthropic principle says that there are things that are obviously designed for man so that man can exist. So when we talk about the planet, when we talk about the earth, which is the primary thrust of this lesson, the earth was designed specifically for us. so that we could live here, so that this could be our home. Now, this church building was designed for this congregation. Your house, even if you weren't there when it was built, you chose it because it fits you. If you actually designed or built your house, then even more so, you designed that house to fit your needs. When you go shopping for clothing, you find the clothing that best speaks who you are, style, fit. You want to accentuate the positive, downplay the negative. You want to communicate who you are, right? It's like that woman that time that said to her husband, honey, does this dress make me look fat? And he said, no, your hips do. And so you just need to know that there are times when there are certain things you just don't say. You don't say that, right? Come on. You are all thinking it. I'm just the scumbag that'll say it publicly, right? All right, so anthropic, meaning that when you look at the earth, obviously it was designed for optimum conditions for us. Why are there no men on Mars? Even though scientists have been looking for them for centuries. There are no men on the moon. There are no men on Neptune. Why is that? Because those weren't designed for men and women. Only the earth, the third rock from the sun, one of the smallest of all the planets in this solar system, designed for us, the anthropic principle. Now, there are actually about 112 very narrowly defined astronomical constants that strongly point to an intelligent designer when we're talking about the earth and the anthropic principle, how it was designed especially for us. Now, as you look backwards, if it was designed for us, then it's not just that we can live here. Someone must have intended for it to be perfect for us. Who was that? Right, that's the God of Genesis. And see, Romans is telling us this. Creation is screaming it, and we're the ones that are wise enough to actually recognize it. And even those who don't claim to be Christians will tell you in fields of science that this is actually true. Now, I don't know why it doesn't bring them to faith, but Paul says even if it doesn't bring them to faith, they become without excuse because they saw, they knew, and they rejected. So friend, you're not walking in the darkness when you take a step of faith because your faith has evidence. That's why we call Christian faith evidentiary faith, because there's evidence to back up. See, we always think, well, we just by faith. Well, it's more than faith. For instance, a tomb is empty in a tomb that used to be outside of Jerusalem. And it's been empty since hours after the most hated man in that area of that time was buried there in a borrowed grave. And no one was ever able to explain why that body wasn't there except for the ones who believed. The Roman soldiers couldn't explain it. The Pharisees couldn't explain it. And Paul has said many times, if anyone had the body of Jesus, eventually they would have produced it and they'd have said, look, this whole thing is a sham. Well, that's evidence. So that's not blind faith. Who else can make that claim? Who else among all the religious leaders in human history can make the claim that I'm going to conquer death, and the proof of it is my grave will always be empty? Who can make that? Who can make that claim? There's only one. See, that's evidence. That's the kind of evidence you could put in a courtroom. And somebody say, well, it's another step to believe that he rose from the dead. Okay, but that's not a big step. What's the only other explanation? He rose from the dead. So let's look at only 10 of these 112 anthropomorphic proofs that God designed the earth. First of all, let's consider the expansion rate of the universe. Now, I realize that isn't the earth specifically, but since the earth is in the universe, this one's important. So what about the expansion rate of the universe? Well, if the universe had expanded at a rate 1/1,000,000th more slowly than it did, expansion would have stopped by now, and the universe would have collapsed on itself before any stars had formed. 1/1,000,000th. If it had expanded faster than it did, then no galaxies would have formed. It had to expand at the exact right speed for us to have what we have here today. Well, what are the odds of that? 1 in a million. 1 in a million that it would have happened just as it did. The expansion rate is perfect for planet Earth to have come into existence. Wonder why it wasn't slower by 1/1,000,000th or faster by 1/1,000,000th? Because God designed it for us. Number two, the oxygen level in our atmosphere. Obviously, we're surrounded by gases. The most prominent one for us is oxygen. The one for plants is carbon dioxide. And of course, we're all being told today that that's a poison, that's a toxin. Well, not if you're a cedar tree. That's food. That's plant food. In fact, recent studies have shown that we actually would be far healthier if there was a much higher level of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere than presently exists. But we're being told it's a poison. See, because the talking heads who don't believe in the God of the Bible, who don't believe in creation, that material is all there is, all there ever was. Carl Sagan, I gave that quote way at the beginning of this series. So they want to control you, and the way to do it in an age where we use fossil fuels is to say, you're producing too much carbon dioxide. And we want to control you because that gives you liberty. That gives you the ability to be mobile and to take care of yourself and to heat yourself. So what we want to do is we want to reduce that. And by reducing that, we reduce your freedom. We reduce your independence, and therefore then you must be more dependent on us. See, that's the whole reason for that. So the oxygen level in our atmosphere, oxygen comprises 21% of the atmosphere. If oxygen comprised 25% of the atmosphere, fires would erupt spontaneously. Notice the difference, 21%, 25%. If oxygen comprised 15% of the atmosphere, humans would suffocate. Now, we don't walk around thinking about, well, I'm just so thankful for this atmosphere that's 21% oxygen. And yet, if it were not that, life would not be possible. The third example is what we call atmospheric transparency. What in the world is that? Well, if the atmosphere were less transparent, not enough solar radiation would reach the Earth's surface. If the atmosphere were more transparent, we would be bombarded with far too much solar radiation. In other words, the atmosphere is just the proper amount of transparency or just properly transparent so that just the right amount of solar radiation reaches the earth and not too much or too little. Wonder why it's just right. The fourth example, the moon-earth gravitational interaction. Now, I know we don't typically think of these things as spiritual, but friends, they're as spiritual as Genesis 1:1. We just don't think about them. What about the Earth-Moon relationship when it comes to gravitation? Well, if the interaction were greater than it currently is, tidal effects on the oceans, atmosphere, and rotational period would be too severe for life to exist on planet Earth. If the interaction between the Earth and the Moon were less, orbital changes would cause climatic instabilities to the point that ultimately we couldn't survive. So I wonder why it's just the right relationship. Why is it just perfect? Well, you tell me. The fourth example, gravity itself. Did you know that if the gravitational force in the solar system were altered by as much as, look at that number, 0.00000, and just keep counting zeros, 1%, our sun would not exist. If it's altered by just that much, I don't even know what that is. Our sun could not exist. Now, there'd be more than just the sun that wouldn't exist, but our sun would not exist. What do you think would happen to the earth if our sun did not exist? Well, I wonder why then it's just right across the solar system. Because this is a privileged planet here. God had a plan. Number 6, centrifugal force. We don't typically get up in the morning and talk about centrifugal force, but understand that if the centrifugal force of planetary movements did not precisely balance the gravitational forces, nothing could be held in orbit around the sun. In other words, our Earth would have flung off a long, long time ago, and an uninhabited piece of rock would be racing through the universe with none of us on it alive. Why is it then that the centrifugal force is just perfectly aligned so that the earth would stay in its orbit around the sun? And we're now experiencing the result of different parts of that orbit and the tilting on our axis when we experience the seasons. They come and they go. God designed it that way. He even says it in His Word. Number 7, Jupiter's orbit. We looked at Jupiter a while ago. It is so enormous that just the hurricane, the what we call the spot on Jupiter, is larger than our planet. Well, obviously, it being that large, it may have some effect on the Earth, and it does. If Jupiter were not in its current orbit, the Earth would be bombarded with space material. Now, I don't mean parts of Skylab. I mean stuff from way out in the universe. Asteroids, comets, all that kind of stuff, meteorites. It is Jupiter, in fact, if you'll notice in the parentheses here, Jupiter's gravitational field acts as a cosmic vacuum cleaner for our solar system, attracting asteroids and comets that might otherwise strike the Earth and destroy us. Wonder why Jupiter is there. God put it there to protect Earth. Why is that? Because Earth is a privileged planet. Number 8, the thickness of the Earth's crust. If the thickness of the Earth's crust were greater, too much oxygen would be transferred to the crust to support life. It would literally take oxygen away from us. If it were thinner, volcanic and tectonic activity would make life impossible. Just imagine what would happen if the Earth's crust was so thin that you just have volcanoes everywhere and earthquakes constantly. Well, there would be no life on planet Earth. Why is it just the right thickness? It's almost as if it was designed that way. What about the rotation of the earth? Because as we know, the earth is rotating on its axis. An old farmer one day said, you know what? We need to quit pulling all that oil out of the ground because we all know that the earth spins on an axle and we take all that oil out of there and it's going to seize up eventually, right? It's kind of like that congressman, if you ever saw that committee where that congressman was concerned and he was asking that general, if we put too many people on the island of Guam, wouldn't it tip over? Yeah, those islands are out there floating there, buddy, and we're trying to keep it. What idiots in D.C. Rotation of the earth. If the rotation of the earth were longer than 24 hours, temperature differences would be too great between night and day. So God set it at 24 hours. If the rotation period were shorter, atmospheric wind velocities would be too great. So just the very time that it takes our earth to spin on its axle, as the old farmer called it, the axis, is perfectly timed for the differentiation between night and day to keep everything functional for who? Us. The 10th example, the earth's axial tilt. We all know that the earth is tilting on its axis. Why is that? Well, if the 23-degree tilt of the earth were altered slightly, surface temperatures would be too extreme on the earth for us to exist. There's a reason why God, when He created planet Earth, put us on a 23-degree tilt from pole to pole, where that axle goes through, right? There's a reason why we're tilting 23 degrees instead of 24 or 25 or 26. It's because 23 is the perfect degree tilt for us to be able to be here. Now, this is only 10 of 112 of these principles, these proofs. But notice that even with just these 10, if they weren't so, we wouldn't be. Now, you know, every now and then, even an idiot gets lucky, right? I mean, every now and then, even President Biden is going to say something that's correct. Just every now and then. But how could you be 10 out of 10? What are the odds of that? Or what are the odds of being 112 out of 112? What are the odds of having every one of these perfectly situated so that people like us could live on this one small, privileged planet? It's because God created it that way. A Christian astrophysicist by the name of Hugh Ross has calculated the probability that 122 anthropic constants would exist for any planet in the universe by chance. And I think that's supposed to be 112, and I somehow put 122. What is the chance that all of these anthropic constants would exist on one planet? 1 in 10 to the 138th power. Now that's a number with 138 zeros. Now to show you what that number looks like, it is estimated that there are only 10 to the 70th power atoms in the entire universe. The entire universe. 1 with 70 zeros. Well, what are the odds that all of these anthropic constants would exist on one planet so that life was perfect? 1 in 10 to the 138th power. There's what that number would look like. There's the number of how many atoms there are in the universe estimated, but that's 10 to the 70th power, and the top number is 10 to the 138th power. One chance in that number that all of these constants would exist. What does that mean? Zero. I studied statistics and probability in college when I was getting my degree in math, and I can tell you right now that one chance in 10 to the 138th power is zero. That will never happen ever. It's like all the parts of the watch in the box. How long do you have to shake it before voila, you have a watch? Forever. It's never going to happen. One critic of the anthropic principle admitted to the New York Times that his real objection was totally emotional because it smells of religion and intelligent design. So I'm going to reject it because it kind of points me to Christ. It kind of points me to an intelligent designer, and I can't accept that. So the anthropic principle, I'm going to reject because I don't like how it makes me feel. In fact, I've already shown you that most people reject the gospel not based upon facts, but based upon feeling. Here's Arno Penzias, who is a Nobel laureate winner, and he says, Astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing and delicately balanced to provide exactly the conditions required to support life. He's talking about planet Earth here. In the absence of an absurdly improbable accident, the observations of modern science seem to suggest an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. You think? And see, that's what Romans 1:20 has been saying since Paul wrote it. When you step outside and you look at creation, you know what it screams to you of? God. This is intricate design. And what does it say to me? There is a designer. Ed Harrison, British astronomer and cosmologist, said this: here is the cosmological proof of the existence of God. Notice what he's saying there. Proof. You know, a lot of people say, well, you can't prove God exists. Romans 1:20 says you can. Creation says you can. You actually can. See, your faith is not blind faith. You've looked at the evidence and rendered the proper verdict. There's complex, intricate design here. And it doesn't matter whether you go out big or go the other direction and go down with an electron microscope. The complexity is both directions. We haven't even talked about irreducible complexity and how you can go down. The smaller and smaller and smaller you get, it's just as complex. So it doesn't matter which direction you go. It's equally complex. He says this is proof of the existence of God. The fine-tuning of the universe provides prima facie evidence of deistic design, meaning that God predates all of it, and that you have to understand when you look at creation that there is a designer and creation is proof of it. Even Fred Hoyle, the great British astronomer and mathematician, said, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. So in other words, God monkeyed with them. You know why? Because he created them. He created them. And so what these scientists are all admitting is what we've known all along. What our eyes have told us. What truth exists is that design must mean a designer. Complex design, even more so. This didn't just happen. Paul Davies, British physicist, says this: one may find it easier to believe in an infinite array of universes than in an infinite deity, but such a belief must rest on faith rather than observation. In other words, eventually, we all must take the step of faith. See, this will not be enough. We've all seen the scientists who've said, well, I'm an agnostic, but eventually we all have to bow the knee of faith and say, Lord, you did it all. C.S. Lewis, in his great work called The Screwtape Letters, where demons are talking back and forth to one another and to Satan, the ultimate head demon. And one of the senior demons named Screwtape, of course the name to the letters, writes to his junior demon, Wormwood, on how to keep people from coming to Christ. He said, keep pressing home on him the ordinariness of things. Above all, do not attempt to use science, I mean the real sciences, as a defense against Christianity. They will positively encourage him to think about realities he can't touch and see. There have been sad cases among modern physicists. So what that head demon was saying is, don't let them see the obvious. Keep them distracted. Don't let them study real science, because if they do, they'll become believers. We've lost a number of physicists because of this. The truth is, friends, creation screams that there is a God. And that's why the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 6 says, by faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. In other words, our faith looks at the evidence and says the worlds were not accidentally formed, but were framed. This planet was framed. When you walk out of this building today, just thank God. Just thank God for this privileged planet. God made this just for you, so that you could know Him, and by faith be regenerated and be adopted into His family and someday experience His eternal kingdom. That's more truth. Let's pray. Father, in Jesus' name, I want to tell you that I thank you for this marvelous, privileged planet. Lord, creation